say based what does tradition say, and then at the end I'm going to explain why that's important because people like to use certain traditions to make us believe certain things about the Bible rather than what it actually says. So let's start off with Enoch. In Genesis chapter 5, we read about him, and it says, Enoch, he walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years. He begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So the question is, did that mean that God took him to heaven? That's what traditionally has been told. Now, this is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5. It says, by faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death and was not found because God had translated him. Or before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. So what does that mean that he was translated? Does that mean that he was taken up to heaven, or was he taken somewhere else? What do y'all think about that?
He was taken to heaven.
Yeah, do you think that he was taken to heaven?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. He said brought over, or brought over, brought over where? Let me know if you what you think. Now let's keep going. There's another verse in Ecclesiasticus, it's 44, verse 16 says, Enoch pleased the Lord and was translated, being an example of repentance to all generations. And again, we see this word translated. Now people interpret this word as meaning that he didn't die. He was translated. He went straight to heaven. But does that what translate mean? This is what the biblical usage of that word translate in Hebrew means to transpose two things, one of which is put in place on the other, to transfer, to change, to transfer oneself, uh, self to be transferred, to go or pass over, to fall away or desert from one person or thing or another. So that's what the word translate means. Uh, means to kind of transfer or change to a different location. But is that location heaven? That's the thing. So the question is, did Enoch go straight to heaven? That's what the Bible studies about right now. Is Enoch and Elijah in heaven right now, or did they have physical deaths? There's another verse from the Apocrypha. This is Ecclesiasticus 49, verse 14. But upon the earth was no man created like Enoch, for he was taken from the earth. So does that mean Enoch was taken to heaven, like we traditionally been taught? Well, based off my perspective, I say Enoch, he died just like every other man. But during his time, the earth was in a lot of turmoil, evil, right before the flood. So the Most High gave Enoch a peaceful death, and he took him away from the evil from the earth. Now let me explain that because it's probably something different that you heard before. You probably never heard that before. But let me use the Bible to explain why I believe that Enoch had a physical death. This is Isaiah chapter 57, verse 1. It says, the righteous perish, and no man lays it to heart. So when the righteous die, no one really thinks about it too deeply. They're like, it's his time to go. And merciful men are taken away, and none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. Now we see that word taken away. The righteous is taken away from the evil to come. Now, when we read this verse, we don't think someone is taken away and just goes, to heaven. Of course, we mean that they've been taken away from this life. They passed on. They're now in the spiritual in the world. They're waiting for, the day of judgment. Now they've been taken away. That's what is implied when a righteous person dies. A merciful man dies. They're taken away from the evil to come. What's the evil to come? That's the judgment to come. So Enoch, he died a peaceful death before destruction of the earth, before the flood came. He died a peaceful death. He was taken away. Now let's try to cross-reference that with some scriptures. So again, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death and was not found because God had translated him before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And we see this phrase was not found. Where else do we see this phrase was not found? Yeah, you know, was not found is the biblical way of saying he died. Let me explain. So Psalm 37, verse 34. Wait on the Lord and keep his way. He shall exalt you and to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, thou shalt see it. I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a green bay tree, yet he passed away, and lo, he was not. Yea, I sought him, but he could not be found. We see that phrase, he was not. The wicked, they grew up like a great tree, but then he passed away. He was not. That's a biblical way of saying that he died. Let's see this again. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Again, we see that same phrase, he was not. It's in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, where people say that he was not because God took him to heaven. Well, it just says that he was not. And that's the same phrase they use in Psalm 37. When the wicked passed away, he was not. That's another phrase to say that he died. Let's see that again in Genesis chapter 14. This is when Joseph, he's in Egypt and he finds his brethren. His brothers come to Egypt during that famine, and Joseph is questioning them. So let's see what he says to them. Let's read this conversation. Verse 8, and Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not, or they knew not him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, Ye are spies to see the nakedness of the land you are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are one man's sons, we are true men. Thy servants are no spies. And he said unto them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land you are come. So Joseph, he's testing them to see if they're spies. In verse 13, they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, right? Jacob had 12 sons, right? He said, Your servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not, because they assumed that Joseph died. They didn't think that he was alive. So again, we see that phrase, the youngest is with the father, that's Benjamin, and one is not. So they saying that Joseph he died. He's not. That same phrase. And now we see it again in Genesis chapter 44, verse 20. And just to confirm that, it says, we said unto my Lord, we have a father and an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead. He alone is left of his mother, and his father loved him. So now they're confirming that Joseph was dead based off what they understood that Joseph was dead. They didn't know he was alive in Egypt. So we see that phrase, one is not, means that he died. Excuse me. Now let's read Lamentations chapter 5. It says, verse 1, Remember, O Lord, what has come upon us, consider and behold our reproach. Our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens. We are orphans and fatherless. Our mothers are as widows. We have drunken our water for money. Our wood is sold unto us. Our necks are under persecution. We labor and have no rest. We have given the hand to the Egyptians and to the Assyrians to be satisfied with bread. Our fathers have sinned, and look at this, and are not. We have borne their iniquities. So again, they saying that the same phrase, we are not, means that they died. Our fathers died, and we bear their iniquities. That sounds very, familiar with the rest of the Bible, how it says that all the time. Now let's go into the New Testament. See Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. When Herod, he slaughters all the babies. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceedingly wroth. He was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and all the coast thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently acquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that was spoken by Jeremy or Jeremiah, the prophet, saying, In Ramah there was a loud heard lamentation and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted because they are not, because they were killed or they died. So again, that phrase not is not or are not. That's just another biblical way of saying that he passed away. So we go back to Genesis chapter 5:22. No, Enoch in verse 24 says, and Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. So that's just another saying that Enoch had another death that took place outside of where he lived. He was taken away so that he could die peacefully before the flood came, before that destruction. So he was not means that he died. So, but I'm going to continue to we're going to break that down a little bit more. But first, let's go into Elijah. Now, people say Elijah went to heaven, right? They say Elijah is going to be he's in heaven right now. He's going to come back in the final days, in the last days. Now let's break this down. Let's say did Elijah go straight to heaven and never died? This is the verse that the people say that happens. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. And it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. So they say Elijah about to be taken up to heaven by a whirlwind. Now let's skip down to verse 11. And it came to pass as they went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. So that word heaven doesn't always mean it's the place where the Most High and His angels sit. That word heaven can mean the sky. Actually, the word heaven, when it says heaven in the Bible, it can talk about three different things. Heaven can be a state of mind of prosperity, like for the people. Like you're in a you have like basically a fruitful land. You have a family, children. You have exceedingly great wealth and a great life. That's like heaven on earth. What we call like colloquially, that's heaven on earth, or like you're living heavenly. Something like that. That can mean heaven. The other definition of heaven is the sky, the literal sky, like we see with where the birds they fly around. And also the third heaven, which is the kingdom where the Most High stays. That's where Paul had a vision. Remember in 2 Corinthians, he said he had a vision that he was in the third heaven. So that when you read heaven in the Bible, it could be talking about different things based off the context. But let's see what this one is talking about with Elijah. So this is the definition of heaven in the Bible of Shamayim in Hebrew. Heaven is translated, or Shamayim is translated as heaven almost 400 times. But heaven literally means heaven, heavens, or sky, visible heavens or sky, as abode of the stars, as a visible universe, the sky, atmosphere, or heaven as the abode of God. So, like I said, it can mean different things based off the context. Let's read Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life, and fowl or birds that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So when it says he created the birds, he created the birds to fly about in the heavens. And when we know that means the sky, because the birds aren't literally in heaven, but they call the sky heaven because it's above the earth. All right. So Elijah went up into the sky, then was transported to a different location, and then he died. He died a natural death as well. Let's get into that. Because this is 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 12. You see Elijah, he actually wrote a letter, perceivably or perceptually from heaven, right? Because they said that he went to heaven. But right here we see that verse 12, there came a writing to him from Elijah the prophet. But Elijah just went to heaven. So how is he writing something to the king? So it's like, we have to understand that the Bible is not always talking about someone when someone's going to heaven. It's not necessarily saying that he's just going into like the abode where the Most High stays. Elijah was known to kind of be transported in different locations. Same way with like some of the apostles in Acts, like they were transported, or like they just went certain places, and they just they were taken up from the Spirit to different locations. But let's read this to chapter 21, verse 12. There came a writing to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, thus says the Lord God of David, your father, because thou hast not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat, your father, nor in the ways of Asa, king of Judah, but has walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and has made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to go a whoring, like to the whoredoms of the house of Ahab, and also has slain thy brethren of thy father's house, which were better than yourself. Behold, what a great plague would the Lord smite your people and your children and your wives and all your goods. And this writing or this letter was written for about 4 years after Elijah went into quote unquote heaven. So we see Elijah was still on earth when he wrote this. Now, this is going to be how we can, definitively say that Elijah and Enoch did not go into heaven because Christ said himself that no one came from heaven but himself. So this is John chapter 6, verse 37. All that the Father gives me shall come to me, and him that comes to me I will in no wise cast out. In verse 38, for I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him that sent me. So we see that Christ himself says that he came down from heaven, and we know that he's talking about the place where God actually sits, because in John it says that in the beginning he was with God and he was God. So he came from the heavens of heavens. Now let's go to John 3, verse 13, and he says, and no man has ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven. So he just said that no one has ever went up into heaven, but he that came down from heaven. So he's talking about himself. He's the only person that has come down from heaven and gone up into heaven. So that just discredits everything that people say that Enoch and Elijah went straight to heaven, because that just says that, Christ just told us that no one has done that. And either we're going to say that, Christ is true, or we're going to say that Christ is a liar. And we know that Christ is not a liar because he's the truth. So we have to believe what he's saying. But let's try to get some other scriptures to understand the context of what he's talking about. So Christ is the only one who went up to heaven in bodily form. When he rose up from the dead, he ascended into heaven in bodily form. He's the only one. So Enoch and Elijah died a natural death just like every other man. So let's confirm that. So this is Hebrews chapter 11. Y'all know Hebrews chapter 11 is almost like a hall of fame of faith. That's what people like to say. People who had a lot of faith. Now let's read about some of these people who had a lot of faith. Verse 4, by faith, Abel, you remember, Abel, he was, Cain and Abel, Cain slaying Abel. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaks. By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death. Okay, Nate, you just said that Enoch didn't die. He just says like he saw he didn't see death. All right, let's keep reading. Let's keep reading and see what it says. And he was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned of God of things that's not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness, which is by faith. Now, verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith, he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundation, whose builder and maker is God. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child which she was past age, because she judged him faithfully who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one of him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in a multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. So they highlighting the faith of Abraham and Sarah, that they were basically elderly people and they were about to be on the brink of death, but they end up having a son, Isaac, and by his seed, he has so many children that are as numerous as the seashore, right? All right, now let's read the next, verse 13. Oh, I mean, right here. So we talk about Abel, we talk about Enoch, we talk about Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Sarah. They all have faith, right? Now let's read 13. These all died in faith. Wait, hold up. You said what? I said these all died in faith. Who was that? Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah. all died in faith. It says it right there. Not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. So you see that Enoch was, he had a natural death. It says it right here in Hebrews. He died along with all the other people that were listed in here. These all died. All right. So when it says by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, it wasn't talking about his death. It was talking about the death of the wicked from the judgment of the flood. That's what he said, that he did not see death. He did not see that horrible death that was about to come on the earth. Right. So he was able to have a peaceful death, as well as his son Methuselah and as well as his grandson Lamech, who was the father of Noah. They all passed away before the flood came. All right, because they didn't, the most like Isaiah 57 says, or 57 says, the righteous are taken away, from that evil, so they don't get to see evil. That's why sometimes it's a blessing to sometimes pass away, because if someone sometimes, when they go through if they're passed away, they don't have to go through that difficult time in life of a struggle. Like some people, it's better to be passed away than go through a period of war, famine, where your country is going to go through a bad, time. It's almost a mercy that, at least, so and so in my family, they passed away before this great tribulation happened, because it would have been probably even harder on them, because, they would have had a harder time going through it. They wouldn't have been able to, make it a little bit easier than us who are younger or who have a little bit more health, right? So Enoch, he died a natural death. All right, but some people may say, but what about Elijah? He's not listed in Hebrews 11. All right, let's talk about Elijah. So now it says Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. So sin and death was reigning all from Adam all the way to Moses. So it said that everybody, Adam is the father of all mankind. So everybody in the line of Adam all the way up to Moses was dead, and even those who never sinned the same sin that Adam did, they all died because we all have sinned. But, until the time of Christ, he was the first one that he died, but he was resurrected. He didn't die because of his sin. He died because, he took the penalty for the sins of, of the nation, of those who he died for. So let's read again. Let's read another verse. Psalm 89, verse 47. Remember how short my time is. Wherefore hast thou made all men in vain? Verse 48. What man is he that liveth and shall not see death? It's a rhetorical question. What man can live and not see death? Shall he deliver his soul from the hand of the grave? Selah. So it's a rhetorical question, basically saying, like, we all die. Life is short. It makes me question, like, my life. What man can live and not see death, basically. So even at that time, they were saying, like, it's just implied that we all are going to eventually pass away. Now, let's talk about this the transfiguration. I don't have to read the whole thing because I know y'all already know it, but just a couple verses to highlight it. Uh, when Christ went to the transfiguration, he took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and he went up to a mountain, and he was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elijah, or Elias in Greek, but that's Elijah, talking with him. So when people read that, they be like, see, Moses is still alive and Elijah's still alive. And, in Revelation 11, they both coming back because they're going to be the two prophets that's going to, preach in the end times. Now, the Bible doesn't say they alive. Now, it just says that they were there. Let's see what it says right here. Verse 4, then answered Peter, and he said unto Jesus, or Yahushua, Lord, is it good for us to be here? If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he yet spoke, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, be not afraid. And when they had lifted their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. So they only saw Christ because everybody else was gone. And they, the Most High wanted to emphasize that as great as Moses was and as great as Elijah was, Christ or Jesus was the Son of God. He was the one that you need to listen to because he has the authority that comes directly from the Most High. As great as Moses was and Elijah was, who were probably the greatest prophets of Israel, he's saying that Jesus or Yahushua, he's the Son of God. He's the one that you need to listen to fully because he's going to, basically lead you to the way of salvation. And then verse 9, as they came down from the mountain, Christ charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. So again, this was a vision. This wasn't that they actually saw Moses and Elijah physically alive. This was a vision that they saw. Same way when Peter saw, he was in a trance and he saw the vision of those animals on the sheep. And the Most High told him to kill and eat. It was a vision. It wasn't literally Elijah and Moses like in bodily form, because we know that they passed away. And verse 10, let's keep reading because this also highlights Elijah. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then they say the scribes that Elijah must come first? And Jesus answered and said unto Elijah, Truly shall come first and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elijah is come already. They knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they liked. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist, because John the Baptist had the same spirit of Elijah. Now, it's not saying that he was a reincarnation of Elijah, because the Bible doesn't talk about reincarnation. It just says that he has the same spirit of Elijah. Basically, he had the same power and the same kind of gifts of Elijah, because people think that, oh yeah, Elijah was reincarnated as John the Baptist. No, because Elijah's pupil, when he went away, Elisha asked for a double spirit of Elijah. So Elisha had the same spirit as Elijah did. But we don't call that like Elijah was reincarnated as Elisha. It just means that he had the same spirit that the Most High gave Elijah. He gave it to Elisha and gave him actually even more of it. So just I want to highlight that. And then this is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is also going to, emphasize that Christ is the only one that is in heaven in bodily form. Verse 20, but now as Christ risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming. So he's saying that Christ is the firstborn from the dead. So we know that, in the past, people have been resurrected from the dead. We see Elijah, he resurrected the widow's son from the dead. But that widow's son, he passed away again. Lazarus was risen from the dead, but he passed away again. Christ is the only one that rose from the dead, and he's still alive. He has the resurrected body, and he then went up to heaven. That's why it's like he's the only one that resurrected and went up to heaven with a resurrected body. Elijah, Enoch, none of the prophets before him have the resurrected body, even Moses. So that's why I said I wanted to highlight that. So why is that important? Because it's important because you don't want to get caught up in myths and fables that try to make you believe things that aren't biblically true. And Titus 1 talks about that, verse 13. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. Now, people be thinking like, what's a Jewish fable? I highlight this a lot. Sometimes people think I'm picking on it, but the book of Enoch is a Jewish fable. The book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, they're fables. They're basically like targums, or they're basically a priest's rendition of the Old Testament, especially Genesis, of what happened. People had a lot of questions because the Bible is basically on a need-to-know basis. They don't really give you a lot of detail, but people try to explain things away, and they try to make other stories seem true. Now, of course, they had oral traditions back in the day, but when you try to make a certain books into, you know, canon and fact, that can lead people astray because there are things in the book of Jasher and the book of Enoch that aren't necessarily, they contradict the Bible for the most part. And, some things are interesting, but, there's some things that they can lead you astray. They can lead you into thinking certain things that are not accurate. And I've seen that before. I've seen that in people who, they believe in the Bible, then they start reading certain books, and they start leading astray. And I never say it's wrong to read books. You can read books for your own edification, but I understand that the Bible is written in a certain way for a reason, and these other books are more for entertainment purposes. So, and also, I want to highlight that because people like to say that Elijah and Enoch or Moses are coming back because they read Revelation 11 and they say that they're going to be the tabernacle or the two candlesticks and the two olive trees. But that's not what that is talking about. That's talking about the witnesses that are before God and on earth. And you read that in Zechariah, I believe, the fourth chapter. So that's another conversation for another day. But you know, I just want to highlight that's not talking about Elijah or Enoch or even Moses. That's just something that people try to explain away, but they're not really doing, the real kind of just discernment to really understand what that's talking about. They kind of like to take the easy way and explain it away. But certain things have to take a little bit more time to flesh out, and rather than just assume things because it's what we've been taught. So that's all I got.